for coming. I think I know most faces in here, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anna Tuttle. I'm the Program and Communications Manager at the Institute on Ecosystems. And I'm really excited to introduce Liz today for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like most of you know this, but I'll say it again. Liz is a professor in political science here at MSU. She is extensively published and has loads of information about just about everything I seem to come to her to ask about. And I was particularly interested in what she's talking about today with recent work we've been doing in climate change and forays into decision-making and management. So it's really interesting. And I also am excited to have Liz here today. The last week of the semester, I know it's busy for a lot of you, so it's also our last rough cut talk. And it is nice to round it out with a social scientist, I feel. We've had people from 10 or 11 different departments or outside agencies this semester, which really has brought, in my mind, a holistic and interdisciplinary view of research that's going on either here at MSU or elsewhere that pertains to research here. So I'm really glad to have you here for all these reasons. And thanks, Anna. Yeah. And also, if you or anyone else is interested in giving a rough cut talk next semester, I'm putting that together now with Rich Reddy, the interim director of the IOE. So please be in touch with me if either you would like to give a talk, or if you know someone would like to give a talk, or if you have a colleague whose research you want to know more about, just send them my way. It'd be great. I'll turn over. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much, Anna, and thank you, everyone, for coming this last week of classes. It's a grueling time of the year. Oh, you know what I need to know how to do is to advance the slides. Oh, you use the keyboard. Okay, oh, shoot, okay. Great. Well, thank you for being here. My research actually is two-pronged in that a large part of what I do is study how narratives influence policymaking and decision-making at different levels, at individual levels, group levels, and potentially at institutional levels. Working with some folks, interdisciplinary team, Jeff Poole, Clem Exerta, Eric Riley, who will be here. Our department had a meeting with the dean, so they're coming a little bit later. We have a proposal under review that looks at narratives and hazard decision-making. And this work here, this work on Whitebark pine, isn't narrative-focused. It is about what kind of information decision-makers might be interested in from the social science perspective in making some decisions about management strategies. Andy Hansen's a PI on this grant, and he has worked extensively and is working extensively with the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, specifically for this grant with the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee. So you can see the list of characters on the screen here. So Andy has been working for the last 3 years and putting together different climate change models for presence absence of where whitebark pine is in the GYA and how that can inform the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee's decision making. And when he was putting this grant together, it's funded through the North Central Climate Science Center as well as supported by the IOE. When he was putting this proposal together, he said, well, let's figure out what some of the social science questions might be, and called on me. And in turn, I'm working primarily with Eric Riley in the Department of Political Science, who is also the director of the HELPS Social Science Research Lab. That is new, and this survey kind of was the first to get that lab up and running, which is going at full bore at this point. And Helen Naughton, who is an environmental economist over at U of M. And then we had some funding for graduate research assistants, Michael Wallner, Kendall Houghton, and we had some undergraduate assistants this semester with Courtney Kellogg and Lena Wooldridge. The Whitebark pine, and so it's really great to see all of you. I'm excited to talk about social science and how we answer social science questions, but also to talk a little bit about the content, the substance of why the whitebark pine and why we were asked to join this, this research group. So with the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, many of you know that this is a really unusual committee from a social science perspective in that managing across jurisdictions is politically really tough. And yet this group, and I think it's been years of building trust, are now really, they're not just coordinating action items, they're coordinating funding expenditures. So my hat is really off to this committee. They have worked very hard in terms of developing these different management strategies for the whitebark pine. So why whitebark pine and why whitebark pine subcommittee? We have a grizzly bear subcommittee, right? But why whitebark pine? Well, whitebark pine is considered keystone and foundational species, so that it is an indicator species for climate change. So when we're seeing such drastic impact and mortality rates with whitebark pine and whitebark pine stands, it's a concern with regard to what might happen in terms of the larger ecosystem. So, and the feds actually have determined that the threats to the whitebark pine potentially warrants threats under the EFA. So it has received some important attention. And whitebark pine is found in about 10% of the GYE, and as you can see in this map shown here. So the GYCC Whitebark Pine Subcommittee put together a strategic plan. I'm not going to go through the mission and objectives. I want to focus your attention, though, on the actions. So their actions to achieve their mission, which is really to help to help the whitebark pine and its sustainability. Their actions really fall into two categories. One called protection and the other called restoration. And so for those of you who might be environmental historians, this might ring a little familiar with that Muir-Pinchot debate of protection, so that's this Muir, the Sierra Club, versus conservation, which is Pinchot, like multiple use of our extractive resources. It's akin. So we have protection actions such as pruning, chemical treatments, and prescribed fire, so protecting that which is there, so not trying to increase abundance, but just protecting and reducing any reduction or any loss. And then there's restoration, which is actually trying to restore to historical levels of whitebark pine, planting, removing competing species. So there are different philosophies that drive these management strategies. And the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee has both kinds of actions. And what we're interested in understanding is, what do public think about that? Right? We're spending a lot of money on it. What do they think? So we, between Eric Riley, Helen Naughton, and I, came up with 3 research questions. One surrounding just simple concern. We have a whitebark pine, which is a species that maybe you've seen and not known you've seen it, maybe you have no clue. And this is really interesting because in the environmental concern literature, we have a lot of concern when we have some kind of attachment to the environmental entity. For example, we have a concern over a bear. So when we know we've had interactions with bears, maybe positive, maybe not, but hopefully positive interactions with bears. And so we've had these actual experiences. And we went into this thinking, not many people are going to really know the whitebark pine. And so what kind of concern do you have for something that you don't have a real kind of relationship, quote unquote, with? Is there an intrinsic value, in other words? So that was one of our questions. Another was specifically for our managers in the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee with regard to, so what do people think? Oh, there's Eric coming in here. So Eric Riley is one of the 3 major people in the social science piece here. So the second question surrounding management strategies, and so what kind of support is given protection and restoration. do people have? And we also decided to ask about no management. So not just protection and restoration, but what happens if we do nothing? A bit as a control, but also with regards to federal lands versus wilderness. And so do people really, do they have a difference of opinion with regards to management philosophies on wilderness, in wilderness areas? So we distinguish between those two. And then finally, willingness to pay, and this is Helen Naughton out of U of M, her bailiwick here. She's an environmental economist. So I'll be presenting some of her work, although it's her work, and so I don't know if I can answer the statistics particularly well, but we'll see how we do here. But it's the willingness to pay is a classic valuation mechanism for valuing an environmental entity such as the whitebark pine. So what do? We had a tri-state survey. We decided to go statewide because what we were in the process of doing with Linda Phillips' assistance is we are geocoding these results so that we can get a distance from public lands and hopefully distance from whitebark pine, presence, absence. But for right now, what you're going to see today is straight up the survey results here, not geocoded. But we did a tri-state survey, not just UIA, because we do have some whitebark pine distributed outside of the GYA. So we did do a random sample, stratified by state population, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Ran it through, as I said earlier, through that Montana State University Health Lab that Eric heads up. And we had 4 phases. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of methodological detail, but had 4 phases, asking people to participate in the web survey first, simply because it's cost effective. And then eventually sent out a hard copy of the survey. And as you, oh, this is not correct. This should say 62 snail mail survey. So 38% web-based response and 62 snail mail response. So by way of wanting to just walk you through what the survey, the construction of the survey, people, and I'm sorry, physical and natural scientists, I know surveys seem like they might be easy to construct, but really people get full-blown training in how to put together surveys, because you can, how you ask the question order, what kind of responses you, Coulter's shaking his head, yes, what kind of response options you give people, it all matters, and you can influence people in different ways without knowing it. So I do recommend even if you're just wanting to get a quick survey out to people, just to pass it under the eyes of the social scientists, it really could improve your results, especially because you're making decisions based on these results. So this is our survey structure. We started out, we wanted to know first and foremost, so what do people know about the whitebark pine, and what kind of experience do they have with whitebark pine? So we asked questions about, have you heard or have you seen whitebark pine? The trees, mountain pine beetles, because this is a source of mortality for the whitebark pine, as well as the white pine blister rust. And then we gave some education. And when I presented these data to the whitebark pine subcommittee, they're like, well, didn't you just influence people by educating them? We weren't presenting a narrative trying to measure different responses. We were giving information about the whitebark pine, about its mortality, about its presence, absence in the GYE system. So we did give a photo, we gave a map, we talked about the ecosystem services of the whitebark pine and the reasons for decline. We gave them some education after we asked them these knowledge and experience questions. So once I had a little bit of information about the whitebark pine, we said, okay, so we wanted to measure level of concern. Asked a series of questions about their concern over the loss, as well as we had a list, and you'll see them later, a list of ecosystem services that came out of the whitebark pine subcommittee's strategic plan. So we didn't make them up. These are ecosystem services that the committee themselves have identified come from the whitebark pine. So we have, so that is one of our dependent variables. and it's a robust variable that you'll see how this was put together later. Management strategies, we gave them definitions. You have to tell people what you mean when you use certain sort of jargon, right? So we gave them definitions of what no management, protection, and restoration mean. We asked them, and these are or-level questions, support or oppose these management strategies both on federal lands and then on wilderness areas. The fifth section is we asked about environmental attitudes. There is a pretty well-known bank of questions called the New Environmental Paradigm. We asked an abbreviated version of that 15. I think we asked 6, 8, 9 questions. And really what this gets at is it is an environmental, it's a scale variable. So the lower the number, the lower sort of the environmentalism or the intrinsic value, and the higher the number, the higher the environmentalism or value of the environment. Trust information sources, demographics, attitudes towards government, those are all very classic social science kinds of questions that we drew from Pew, Gallup. And then finally, climate change questions, also questions that have, the standard questions that have been asked by other entities. So let's just say who answered this survey. Again, we did, it's a tri-state survey. Most of the folks were indeed from the Northern Rockies. This is just by way of interest. We didn't use this as an independent variable. Those who did come in here, most of them from California, but we do have in-migration from states close to us, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Utah. And the respondents, for the most part, were from here. If you consider newcomers being 10 years or less, 12% of our respondents were newcomers. So 78% have been here for a while. So then that goes to these ideas of sense of place and attachment. This is a lot of information on the slide here, but just, again, who responded. So we did have more males and females than are represented in the population, so we do have some kind of response bias there. Our median age, 59, again, that's probably a little bit high given the population. Mostly Caucasian. Our income, our median income was 50 to about 70,000. I just looked this up this morning. In Montana, the median income is 46,766. In Wyoming, 58,252, and in Idaho, 47,334. So between the 3 states, I would say we're a little bit above what the population of these states are in terms of income. And we have a pretty educated population who are responding. So what the work we haven't done yet is to weight based on population our results. Well, that's going to be another round of statistics that we need to do. But one of the things that Eric came up with, which I thought was really interesting, and you can feel free to talk about this a little bit, Eric, too, is that we do have a composite here of male, white, older, 40-plus years, relatively wealthy, conservative or mixed, and we'll get to some of those those tables in a little bit. Relatively well-educated, uses public lands frequently, who are concerned about climate change, which is pretty interesting. It's composite, though, right? But only 10% of the respondents fit all those characteristics simultaneously. But I think what Eric, his idea here is that, and I'm speaking for you, Eric, but that we in this tri-state area, I think we have potentially, anyway, sort of this unnamed or untapped, maybe, environmental people who have a positive disposition toward what we would call environmental attitudes. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not really. The 10% figure is actually, when you take all of these and you consider that they have to meet all of these characteristics simultaneously, it was about 10% of the population. population. If you throw out income, where you have a lot of missing values, and you extend down to people with a high school education, you get about 15% of the sample that fits all of those characteristics at once. And it's a new kind of environmentalist. The literature has identified them, but managers haven't identified them. So there's some tremendous opportunities here.
Yeah, I did leave that off, so thank you.
Liz?
Yes.
Do you have any idea as to how that composite compares to the population composite? So which are your sample composite?
Right. Well, that all I looked up right now is just income and some education. Our education was through the roof, and in contrast to the population. So the answer is not right now, but this is something that we're going to wait for before we send this out for publication.
I think another interesting point there is that the bias in responses, we know there are some biases, but it actually helps answer one of our primary research questions, is who's concerned about whitebark pine? People who took the time to complete the survey and send it back, and so we've identified this subpopulation.
Yes. So not surprisingly, we have a more conservative sample who are responding to the survey, but I also want to point your attention when we were looking at taxes and spending. These are attitudes towards government. The federal spending on land management, too little, is 35%. So just note that, right? Because that will come into play in a little bit. Our new environmental paradigm scale, I just wanted to show that so while we might have this very male, very educated, maybe slightly high in income sample bias, there's a normal distribution on this NEP scale, on the new environmental paradigm scale. These are just the descriptive so far. And then with regard to climate change opinion, and I've got some new stuff that I just looked up today too on this. So these were questions that are typical questions. So you're concerned about global climate change. So we do have high levels of concern with those who responded to the population. I think, 64%. So I looked at Yale Climate Science Center, at Pew, and at Gallup today. They asked this question, the concern question, all slightly differently, so it's not exactly apples to apples here. But this is really surprising to me. So here in the GYA in 2015, when this survey was disseminated, so what do we have? 64% said very concerned or somewhat concerned. Gallup in 2016 had 64%. Pew in 2015, 45%, and Yale 2014, 52%. So these numbers are, right, so 45 with Pew, 52% with Yale, 64 with Gallup, 64 with the GUAA. When I originally saw these data, I thought, oh yeah, we are really high in concern for, with regards to global climate change. But Gallup had the exact same percent in their U.S. population, which I thought was interesting. Similarly, so let's see, so global climate change, we asked this question, forced response here, right? So is an environmental problem causing a serious impact now, in the future, won't have a serious impact, does not exist. So we do have a population, a sample response here, who are concerned with regard to global climate change having a serious impact now. And then finally, with the cause of global climate change, human caused, I also have some of the Yale, Pew, and Gallup data. So in the GYA, we have 41% of our respondents said yes, that climate change has human causes, 41%. So I thought, wow, that's really close from what I recalled, So we have Pew in 2015, 45% of Pew's data said, yep, global climate change is human caused. Yale in 2014, 48%. Gallup in 2016, 65%. That was a bit of a surprise to me. So we're on the lower side, but more in line with Yale and Pew's results with regard to, in the U.S. population, what their results are for concerns or the causes of global climate change. So partly why I'm going to these other national data sets is really to say, okay, well, we know we have a response bias, and how does that compare with regard to our national opinions with regard to climate change? And depending on which survey you look at, we're not that different, or we could be different. But my point is that I don't think we're that far off of national norms with this particular survey. Again, some more descriptive statistics here. So we had responses, right, that high knowledge and high experience. We really weren't expecting that. So people who responded to the survey had, many obviously, 68% had heard of whitebark pine, 56% seen the whitebark pine. So the whitebark pine has been in the news, right, with regard to the mountain pine beetle and the blister rust, so higher levels of those who have heard. So the bottom line is that we have a sample response here who has pretty high levels of knowledge and experience with the whitebark pine, pretty high levels of concern for the whitebark pine. 88% very or somewhat concerned. Okay. We have a response. We have a sample population who spends a lot of time recreating in public lands. And finally, this list here at the bottom, these ecosystem services, seed habitat protection, runoff, recreation, and diversity, all came from the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee Strategic Plan. And again, I think pretty consistently high levels of concern, maybe with the exception of recreation, which is interesting, I think, given that we think about recreation and recreationalists as being an important group here. It was not valued as highly as some of the other ecosystem services. So this is some of Eric's work here in constructing the dependent variable of regarding concern. So just to give you an idea of, this was turned into a very robust interval level variable. So we could run a regression on this, and we had, Cronbach's alpha that was really high, of a 0.916. But we created a additive index, basically. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is going to just say what was significant and what wasn't. But these are, Eric ran this with 3 different specifications, and if you have some questions, then we can talk about this in the Q&A. But basically, this list of independent variables, just trying to understand what are the drivers, what are the indicators for high levels of concern for the whitebark pine. And what it boils down to is, so those indicators of high levels of concern, females, that's supported in the literature, education supported in the literature, time recreating on public land supported in the literature. Good news for us, trust in scientists, right? High levels of environmental concern, as well as climate change, and high levels of knowledge in the whitebark pine. And the non-significant factors, view of federal government spending, age, race, and income. With regard to support for management of the whitebark pine, this is just an ordinal level scale. We didn't build any cool interval level dependent variable here, so we're just doing association statistics at this point. So, but interesting if you look just simply right now at these descriptives, right? So we do see opposition to doing nothing on federal lands, in contrast to support for both protection and restoration activities on federal land. And we have, and it's not that different in wilderness, which was a big surprise. We thought that we would have a stronger, we thought we would see a bigger difference between management strategies on federal land versus management strategies on wilderness, but we didn't. We did see a little bit of difference, but there's really not that much. There's really not that much. So we just did some simple chi-square analyses, and I started to try to put them in there with their associations. So, but it got really too messy. So I'm just going to give you sort of the highlights here, the bullet points. So with regard to low support, right, low support for no management, so low support for no management of the whitebark pine. So those who have higher levels of concern don't want to see no action, right? Those who have a great concern for climate change don't want to see no management action. Those who have high environmental scores don't want to see no management action. Then with regards to specifically the protection management actions, so not a surprise here, high levels of concern for whitebark pine, yes. So we want to see some support for protection. High levels are concern for climate change and high levels of environmentalism. Want to see some interventions or management strategies with regard to protection. It was the exact same for restoration. Now, a similar study was done in the Cascades, and they did find a difference. The support was for protection, not restoration. Stronger support for protection, not restoration. But in the GYA, we didn't find a difference here. But kind of interesting, there were no significant associations with time recreating on public lands or knowledge and gender across all three kinds of management actions, no management, protection, or restoration. And then finally, with Helen Naughton's willingness to pay for management, this was the question that was posed to people. Would your household be willing to pay a one-time tax of, and there was variable data that was pulled in, and that number could have been 10, 25, 50, 100, 250, 500, or 1,000. So would your household be willing to pay a one-time tax of some amount to fund this whitebark pine management program in the Northern Rockies? So these are the descriptive statistics for who said yes to these specific amounts. And not surprisingly, lower the amount, the more people said, sure, I'd be willing to pay this one-time tax. And the higher the amount, the lower the willingness to pay. So she conducted, and this is where, I don't know if you're going to ask me hard questions about random utility model estimates. But she ran this random utility model, and so she has come up with willingness to pay. So this is pretty interesting. A willingness to pay $133 per household. So remember, 35% said too little on federal spending. So we have some pretty interesting results here and consistent, right? So what this translates to is that for the tri-state area, which is 1.2 million households, that aggregates to $158 million. That's a lot of money, right? I took a look at the no responses. Those people who said, nope, not going to pay anything. I don't care what it is. Can't afford to pay. Federal agencies should manage their money better. And I need more information. So we have some education opportunity there, I think, as well. I mean, some of it, can't afford to pay, you're not going to shift that, right? Federal agencies should manage their money better. This is attitudes towards government. But I need more information. That's a window of opportunity there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. No.
So,
yeah.
We do. So did you look at the percentage of the family's income in regards to what they're willing to pay in terms of how much they would value it? Like, I looked at that right away, and I'm like, oh, I'd love to give $1,000, but I can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's a value in where I would pick it. Does that make sense? Like, in relation to our...
It does make sense, and I know that in Helen, there is a relationship between income and willingness to pay, and there are some other variables that also influence that as well. But income is one of them.
So you can see how much people value it.
What the tipping point is. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And she'll be writing, and we'll all be writing up. We have a gajillion manuscripts coming out. Okay, no, 4 manuscripts coming out of these data. So I'd be happy to share her table with you on that when this gets written up. So not surprisingly, people who prefer the no management in public lands and wilderness have a lower willingness to pay also, right? So people who are more supportive of management strategies are willing to pay more than those who want no management. So 3 kind of broad takeaways here. And this is good news for the managers, right? There is support. There is support for both protection and restoration management activities. There's public support, and it's not differentiated. So they can actually, there are times when I feel like sometimes managers, because we live in such an intensely political world, managers are very careful with how they talk about their different management activities, and I think that I think this could be more publicly sort of displayed here, and we have that. I think the interest and the more education, the window of opportunity there, and sort of this undiscovered or maybe potential environmentalist in the area that can be tapped. That's a potential for support for these public agencies to do the work that the good work that they're doing. So we have potentially a new sort of environmentalist that hasn't been really specified in this tri-state area, and there is support for spending actual money on this through the willingness to pay question. So we didn't know what we were going to find out doing the survey. Managers were pretty nervous, and it ended up being good news for them. And they're, I think, relieved more than pleased, but but I've presented these to them, these data to them, or these results to them, and they're happy. So I don't know, what what the next steps forward for the Whitebark Pine Subcommittee are with, all the information that Andy's given them in terms of decision making on their strategies, and this is pretty new, and we still have work to do. This is why this is a rough cut, right? We still have work to do on the data analysis here. But we're pleased that we were able to give some good news. So, thank you. Yes?
Yeah, I don't want to date myself, but I'm kind of middle of the pack baby boomer. And that's kind of what you're describing there, that median being 59-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of us kind of grew up through the 70s, the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, NEPA.
So this is an example of giving context, a potential interpretation to a number, right? That's great, and that's what you do. So you have a number, and you give some. I'm just doing a sort of a footnote on social science interpretation of data, right? So you get some data, and then you say, okay, well this might be why. So those of us in that age bracket, we lived in and through the early environmental movement. So thank you.
Always interested, as you know, in semantics, and this question of no management, interesting one, because there would be some people who would argue that you can't do no management. In other words, no management is a decision as much as doing something. And that's a difficult concept to get across to people. Have you ever seen any research that's tried to tease that apart at all? I realize you didn't try to do it here.
That tease it apart.
In terms of what people perceive as no management.
Well, we defined no management in the survey. I don't remember the language that we used. I don't know the survey with me. Do you remember how that was defined? But I think we literally said like something like no management action taken on public land. So I don't know that whether framing it as a decision or not, a non-decision would have made a difference in how people responded because we gave a definition to it. We gave a definition to protection and to restoration too, as per what the Whitebark Pine subcommittee said.
We defined it more as no action, but he's right that not doing something is a decision.
Yes,
as well.
that's right.
One of the options.
That's right.
There are different ways to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Have you ever seen anyone try to?
There's been some work, I can't remember anything offhand. There's been some work on that front.
Can you tell me your name? You're so familiar and I should know you.
Maybe I don't want to.
I know everyone else apparently knows you.
My name is Ted Weaver.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So if there were no interest and no willingness to pay and so on, how often under those conditions do you think, I have faith in the Forest Service, let's say that. I think that I might strongly support them taking action without asking the public. And, it's almost like I'm not so sure how enthusiastic I am about polling politically during election times. I think the poll may guide what's going on in ways that I'm not expressing myself well.
No, so you're saying, no, you're correct that a survey, or the second you ask a question, you change the environment. So that's, I think you're onto something there, that we, as social scientists, understand that the second we look at measuring anything, it changes the thing, right, that we're measuring to some degree. So we can't core sample people. We have to talk to them, and in talking to them, we do change. It's true. And, yeah. That's true.
That's the objective with the language, but we had some people write back with angry responses saying this was a subversive attempt to try to influence the population and to get them to spend money, and so you get some of that.
Yes.
When I read surveys from environmental groups, I'm pretty sure that they're not really wanting to know, but they're wanting to tell me, keep me thinking their way, right?
Yes, and so there are, and that was not our intent. However, there were some people who felt that way, and so we had surveys returned to us. In our informed consent, put my number, office number, in there, and said, so if you have any questions or comments, please call me. Because I wanted them to not get the help lab number, I wanted them to get a researcher. I had a lot of people just wanting to talk. I mean, vent about the federal government and how awful the government is, but some people, I mean, it was really, mostly from Idaho, I have to say, families who are loggers who have actually planted whitebark pine in their backyard because they love it so much, but they feel like their whole livelihood has been taken away. I mean, these are very intense stories, and I just listened. I mean, I wish I could have done a qualitative sort of follow-up, but they were really very intense stories, mostly about loss of employment, which really meant loss of identity and sense of place in life, and very angry with the federal government for that perception that they took it away. So I had lots of those conversations.
And just as a tip, so in the first round we said questions or concerns. In the last round we just said if you have any questions, contact. And we got dozens of calls and letters the first time and the second time 0. Yeah. If you don't want to get that kind of feedback, don't ask for concerns.
So both of you are, yeah.
Well, I was intrigued by your opening, kind of contrasting the music show worldview, and that you didn't really see that in your survey results from your interpretation of protection versus restoration.
Nope.
Do you think the public has any understanding of that dichotomy?
Well, we gave, not of the Muir Pinch show, but we did give them definitions of protection and restoration. So they had those specific definitions, restoring to, historical presence through these management actions versus maintaining through protection. So given the definition, this is how they responded. So maybe if we had gone into that debate, it would have become more politicized and we would have potentially seen a difference. I don't know. But we just gave the actual management strategies.
I'm just kind of intrigued, I guess, because I know a lot of people that trace sort of environmental movement maybe back to Leopold and forget the fact that he spent most of his career working for Gilbert Pinchot. And now there are people arguing that the Gallatin Forest Plan is under revision, more use of it, or should we be protecting it? And I don't hear his name come up. So it's gone away somewhere. People that are arguing for more utility are trying him out.
So you are grieving the intellectual loss of a father.
Personally, I'm afraid it would be dangerous if they rediscover it. I'm supportive of policy.
Okay.
The fact that we don't have that debate anymore.
So you're saying the debate is now just within the sort of that conservation world, not straddling that preservation versus conservation. That's interesting.
An irrelevant footnote. Excuse me. If you go downtown to the Forest Service office, there's a letter framed on the wall, and it's from Pinchot saying, who has just taken over the management, Forest Service management, saying what the people who, it was previously managed by Interior, and it was moved to agriculture, and saying that he wanted no changes in management, period, as a result of the change, until he came out with a conclusive statement about what change should be made. And that's posted right down there on the wall. I think it's an original, and it's inappropriate to have it so exposed, in my opinion. It's such a cool document.
So it should be protected.
Yeah, it should be protected.
All right, I'll talk to Lisa.
Not restored.
Yeah.
I'm curious, would you present this to the management task force?
Managers, yes, yeah, the Whitebark Pine
Subcommittee? Or even
Subcommittee.
the recommendations for us as educators. What is the narrative that comes from, that you would suggest based on this data to get at change or to get at this composite person and to get them to really buy into this message that we should protect, whether it's the Whitebark pine or
I'm not sure if it's a narrative or well, narratives are strategies. But I guess your question is saying, how do you reach these folks then? And what is the narrative that would reach these folks? Well, I don't definitively know that, right? But I would, off the top of my head, I would say that you can't use the word environmental. It's too loaded. It's a condensation symbol is what we call that, so that people bury or apply to this term all these values, and it tends to be negative. And we have, and Bruce, you know this. I mean, we've got really so our ag sector, I think, are some of our more environmental. If you actually were to objectively define this by carbon footprint, for example. I mean, there are folks who actually fix their cars versus trade them in for the newer models. So there are, I think that, but this isn't based on these data. This is just based on me saying, not using the word environmental, but there are words like stewardship, right? And that I think are more perhaps palatable to this new undiscovered or untapped environmentalist. Do you have something to add to that?
Anytime you do a survey, when you're done, you wish you would ask other questions. What you don't know is what they're doing on the public lands, right? Like hunting, fishing, logging, right? Hunting,
As you refer to, and you probably said this in the beginning, but you refer to the survey as a GYA survey sometimes, when you call it the tri-state. What is it? Did you separate out the actual adjacent zip codes?
So let me thank you because that should be clarified. So this was a tri-state survey. The Whitebark Pine Subcommittee is a GYA entity. So their focus is a GYA. We wanted to capture a larger population and distance from. And so we are going to, so all of our, we'll geocode. So all those who have, who were on the web, we have lat long, and then we have zip code, address and zip code. So Linda Phillips will do that. So it really is it was probably my misspeaking, not your mishearing. It is a tri-state survey for an entity that is GYA.
So you could have triggered me when you talked about people from Idaho County. You could have people from Panhandle, Idaho. A higher proportion of loggers there than the other parts of
That's right. So, and what we will do with that geocoding is that we're going to geocode response and non-response, so that we're going to see if our response rate were clustered in particular areas, and our non-response rate clustered in particular areas geographically. That's important information to understand in terms of being able to put context and interpret these results.
Yeah, I'd especially like to know if people, some of those regions, differentiate between western white pine and white pine.
Well, I had a lot of conversations about 5-needle pines, so I can't answer that question because we didn't ask that question, but yes, there are different species there. That's correct. Yeah, you guys are really great. I thought we were going to get out of here early. Okay.
No, so gubernatorial candidate Sean Forte has represented as fact that state forests are better managed than the national forests. And you said you got a lot of comments about antagonistic views of the government.
Federal government.
So, but that was specifically a question that UIA is.
Well, because our questions were really about the federal government and federal lands. So
we did have a question asked about confidence in the federal, state, and local government.
Oh, that's true. There was no difference. Right. There were no differences. It was all low, actually.
Well, I'm very low trust.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where this known truth comes from. I think it has to be, people in favor of transfer of federal lands to the state want to be allowed to do things on land.
So putting my narrative hat on, I would say that in a compelling narrative makes truth claims. It doesn't matter if they're real or not. So I'm not making a comment as to whether his was true or not true. I'm just saying that that's what a compelling narrative does. And it's very frustrating as a public because we respond to those, and you can influence people with lower levels of knowledge with truth claims, whether they're true or not, right? So hence the power of narrative or narrative. So I think it might be good to look at this from a narrative perspective as opposed to where is he getting that truth from? maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but it's part of a narrative that is very influential, very powerful.
I'm quite sure it's not true, but beyond that, the narrative might change now that the state wants to log triple trees. People may be less happy about state land management than they were last year. These are both.
Yes, we will see.
I'm just thinking, Bruce's question has got me thinking, when you do this, I mean, I see this as, trying to gauge people's values. So does it matter so much they are identifying the right tree when you're asking, in a way? I mean, it does for, like, your point here, support spending on whitebark pine management, but their first two conclusions, it seems like it maybe doesn't matter so much, which makes me wonder, I was thinking about that, and then I thought, well, do you feel in your experience, would you get drastically different, and maybe it wouldn't matter a lot, maybe I'm off, but would you get different results if you were asking about,
The grizzly bear?
grizzly bear? I was going to say, like, the megafauna or the cute little fuzzy guy.
Eric is going, yes, let me answer. Yes, yeah. I would say yes, because they're more politicized, too. Go ahead.
We don't know for sure, so there is a fifth manuscript here, and that is looking at whether this is deductive or inductive. So are people taking their experiences with individual species or situations and creating their general environmental views and views of climate change out of that, or is it that they have really general basic views about climate change and the environment, and they're just applying them? You've given many species pretty much, and they apply those to those species. And literature doesn't say it so far, but we have some data that we can use to keep that out.
But the whitebark pine is not politicized, like the wolf and the bear are. Rick, I think you have 2 minutes.
If you had to change one thing in your design, your implementation of the survey, what would it have been?
Well, it's something we didn't talk about. And that had to do methodologically. We sent out, asked people to participate in the web. We gave a link in a letter, and people didn't understand how to put that they needed to put this link into a search or into the address bar, not a search bar, and we lost a lot of respondents because they couldn't figure out where the survey was. So it was a simple methodological, really big issue. So I answered a lot of phone calls about where to go in the web and to put things in the address bar, not in the search bar. But this has been fixed with Qualtrics, which I can talk to you about, and I haven't actually told you about that, Eric. So with your survey, Rick, I can show you how to not make the same mistake.
We sent a follow-up letter, and I'm not as convinced it was as big a problem. We sent a follow-up letter a couple weeks later with more explicit instructions.
Yeah, I got it. All right, well, thank you very much.